Hello. Um, yeah, we did some research looking at lockdown and the impact of that on mental health and what the statistics were telling us. And we've all noticed COVID has impacted loads of people's mental health. And what then is the barrier around people asking for help? So we talk about 4 levels of stigma. We talk about self-stigma. That's the stigma within ourselves towards whatever messages we've internalized, why we shouldn't be feeling this way, why we shouldn't be asking for help if we aren't that sort of person, all that internal narrative stuff. We've got public stigma, the stigma that the messages that are spread about people who maybe experience anxiety, depression, the types of messages that are in the media as well. There's also there's systematic, yeah, that's harder to say. That's where your systems are workplaces, different forms of systems in society that forms stigma as well. So there are loads of different ways that stigma can impact us and impact on the way we do reach out and we ask for help. Around COVID, there was 41% of people that we did an interview to see what was happening with stigma and discrimination around mental health. 41% said that stigma had decreased during lockdown. And maybe that was due to people feeling that it was okay not to be okay. I mean, if there was ever a time, a global health pandemic, naturally would be the time to do that. But 28% did say their stigma had increased. And that was most commonly experienced from family members online and from healthcare professionals and in their employment. And I guess that's really, really challenging, is they're the things that you kind of expect, the closest people, the people that you want to reach out to, you may experience stigma from. And I guess just something else just to highlight would be that the self-stigma, 54% said it increased, because they saw a world that the media and social media have said that everyone's struggling, so why should I be struggling? Relatively, I'm okay. What's going on there? You can feel guilt around that. So I don't know, is that an okay way opening bit, Sophie?
Absolutely, Lynn. And actually, you've touched on one of the things that I was actually going to ask you about, in more than one, actually. But I think you've also really clearly described why we wanted to run this session so much, because we know that obviously in lockdown, everyone is struggling. It's been, I think, one of the biggest challenges to most of our mental health for a really long time. And even those of us who are blessed with generally good mental health, I think, we've all struggled at various different points. But I think it can be, sometimes we kind of look outside and we're like, oh, well, there's this global pandemic and, people are fighting for their lives. And sometimes we can look at ourselves and sort of, well, I've got nothing to fuss about, basically. I should just get on with it. But that's exactly what you're describing, really, is that kind of internalized stigma, isn't it?
About who should suffer and why you should suffer and who shouldn't suffer. And that's when we look at, definitely intersectionality issues, and that's where there's different other types of audiences. If you are, say, of ethnic minority, if you are from LGBT communities, if there's other areas in particular religions that we know that help seeking can be more difficult, that can involve disclosure or declaration of other issues. There can be other communities where there are increased barriers. So for us, it's really important that we look at that those messages that we say, whether it is around men, and I know we've got me in the shed here to talk about it, but there are particular people who don't, audiences who will more typically struggle to ask for that help. And I don't know if it's something which is probably the awkwardness. I don't know if you find that, but why people don't ask, why people don't have this conversation commonly. I think that's something which has been something for me which has struck me. When you work in mental health and when you do deliver successful mental health first aid and when you've trained as a therapist, people generally know you're okay to be chatting about that. And myself, I've got loads of experience of accessing help, and people kind of knew at the start of lockdown. I realised how much more open people were being with me about their mental health. And it is so unfortunate that it took a global health pandemic for people to realise that they're like, actually, hey, you're how would I get that? How do I go to my GP and talk about antidepressants? How do I do this? So I would say definitely there has been more generally a discussion, because if anyone says, yeah, if you get an email, hope you're keeping okay, or hope you're keeping well, it's so hard for everyone now. It's a challenge, isn't it? So yeah, but it has opened that more normalizing someone turning around and saying, oh God, no, it's been so hard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, I think, a really great picture, a really accurate picture that you've painted there. One of the things I noticed, I think, at the start of lockdown was that we weren't quite there in terms of talking about our mental health. It's definitely changed a little bit over the last couple of months. I noticed at the start, we would talk about the situation. We would go, oh, this is very strange. The situation is strange. The situation is challenging, rather than going, I feel terrible. I feel overwhelmed or lonely. But it does feel like we're getting there and feeling more comfortable to have those conversations.
But you mentioned,
go on.
I was just going to say, like you mentioned there, the words overwhelmed and lonely. Like, for me, that's one of the things. And we have resources. We do have resources on our website, and I think you will be getting shared these afterwards. We've got one of them, which is our What's on Your Mind, which is it's designed for education and young people. It can be used for anything. And it gives you an example of all the different words to open the conversation, because often people don't have the mental health literacy to talk about and put the names to the feelings, to say, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling distressed, I'm feeling angry. And we just don't have that vocabulary there. And that's when somebody does turn around. And I think it is, again, that for us, one conversation at a time. If someone turns around and says, as I sometimes do, say, I'm really struggling today, that gives permission for the next person to say, I'm really struggling too. And then you've got that honest, open conversation, which again for us is just normalizing that. So often before the pandemic, whenever we gave excuses for not turning up to things, or we'd often just use physical health or other things and kind of cover up whether that was. And we do hope that after this, that there's a reason people can come. It can because they're not feeling great or they're not feeling up to it. Not that I wish that upon anyone. And we do have, I think later on I'll be talking about Time to Talk Day. It is on the 4th of February, and it's one day where we just dedicate to talking about mental health. And I don't know if that is a barrier, people being scared to open up a conversation, if it's beyond. But that's something which, see, we're not a service provider. We don't provide one-to-one support, but we encourage people to have the conversation. And we do have on our website places where you can signpost people. We're not saying be an expert in mental health. We're saying be there and be able to listen to someone when they're not doing okay.
Brilliant. That's brilliant, Lynn. Thank you. I think we're going to talk a little bit more as we go on about actually some of those things that you've just touched on about how you start a conversation about your mental health. But I'm gonna bring in Ken now, so please feel free to unmute yourself, Ken. Now Ken is from the Men's Shed in Lockerbie. We're really grateful that you've joined us today. Now, Men's Shed's not a mental health charity, but a lot of what you do is about supporting men who are struggling in some way. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, our Men's Shed exists to create a space where men can come together to socialise, to work together, and at the same time, sort of almost by accident, give each other mutual support. Lynn was saying there about how men in particular are not good at reaching out or expressing their emotions, and there's a whole long societal structure there that's, man up, be the strong one, be the tough one, and all this. And sometimes you need somebody in the shed who can say, I'm having a good day today. I'm having trouble with this thing or that thing, or I'm worried about something. And you then find that other guys will open up and either offer support, or they themselves have said, I thought it was just me. And that's the hard bit for me, is because we're there to help reduce isolation, but when people think it's just me, that's the worst kind of isolation. You shut yourself down, or you've been shut down, and not sharing, not experiencing, not even looking for the help outside. So yeah, a bit, as you say, we're not a mental health charity, we're not a service provider. but we do try to listen and to signpost people where it's necessary. And yeah, just get a kettle on, get a cup of coffee, get a biscuit, and just hear what the problem is. And we find that within the pool of men that are there, there's usually somebody else that's had some experience of it and can put some support in there, which is a massive help.
Yeah, it feels like that's kind of integral to the way that you support men, is just being able to go, it's not just you, you know, there's a whole bunch of us and we've been there too, you know, you're not alone. And breaking down, I think, some of the stigma that Lynn talked about, because I think that can be, I think there is a particular stigma that's attached to what it means to be a man who's not feeling great, you know, whether that's a day-to-day worry or something more long-term like depression or anxiety. There is a lot of stigma there for men, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, I really not knocking anybody here, but we have a very big problem with men's health in general. And a significant part of that problem is having information out there that's accessible. If you go to, well, just now you go to the doctor's waiting room, there are no magazines, there are no leaflets, there are no brochures. But in the time before, it was the British Heart Foundation, wonderful organisation. They have a great information thing. Virtually every illustration, it's a woman who's on the picture. So if you're not included in the message, you don't feel that you're being targeted by that message. It doesn't relate to you. And men won't talk about their own health unless they're really pushed, unless they're really under pressure. And the way I look at it is it's very much like the old Les Dawson sketch where the two mill workers, the two mill women, where they would say, oh, you know, have you seen so-and-so? Oh, no, we've not seen her. She's got problems. Down there. It's not talked about. Men are, yeah, probably about in the 1950s just now. We won't talk about stuff. I had a brush with a particular couple of diseases, illnesses, and as a result, I will talk about them. And my kids will, you can see them roll their eyes because they go, oh my God, Dad's going to start talking about testicles and colons and things. And oh my God. But it opens it up. It gets us talking about it. And it does help. We were talking the other day there about one of my chaps who was concerned that he was going in to have a pacemaker fitted. And to him, his idea of having a pacemaker fitted was having your chest ripped open and guys in there up to their elbows pulling bits out and putting machinery in. And one of the other blokes tipped over and went, can you see that little scar on my neck? And he went, yeah, that's where it went in. And then there's a little aerial here, and once every year or so I go up and there's a lad goes and puts an aerial on, a little machine on it, and it changes it all and it checks, and I get an MOT, and it was great. And the relief to the fellow who was going in, because his fears had just vanished. He was still worried about it because it's an operation. But suddenly there was somebody there who was talking to him in terms he understood, rather than his doctor saying, well, what we'll do is open up an artery and we'll insert a stent. And very technical, very dry. But it didn't address his worry, his fear, his concerns, and he was thinking of not having that operation, in which case he'd probably not be here today. So yeah, it does help.
Thank you. That's a really great example. So one of the reasons that we obviously invited the panelists that we did today to talk about this is to look at reaching out. And I think reaching out is something that we can all do. Some of us need to reach out and actually say, I'm not doing so great right now, I'm struggling. And some of us need, you know, we look at the people around us and we go, hey, are you okay? And it's the people around us that we want to reach out to and kind of check in on. So given what you said, that actually men often find it really hard to talk about this kind of stuff, what kind of suggestions would you give if someone has a man in their life that they're worried about?
One truism that we use in the sheds is that men don't talk face to face. We talk side by side. Do something with them. It might be going out for the day. It might be going and working on a job together, and then just chatting and listening to what they're saying, and then asking, how are you feeling about things, or I'm not so sure about the way things are going now, I'm worried about it. What about you? And then just listen to what they've got to say. Don't try to make it right. Don't argue with them, because that's how they feel. And sometimes they'll open up, sometimes they won't. Sometimes it'll take 2, 3, 4 nudges, but stick with it, because I'd very much rather have somebody tell me to back off a bit than for somebody's relatives to phone up and say, oh, we've lost somebody, because that happens. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened in my shed, but it has happened in people around us, and it's a failure. We feel it's a failure because we missed somebody. We could have helped.
Can I just come in on that, Sophie? Because I really
definitely.
resonate with what Ken's saying there, especially around the kind of the technical language you mentioned as well, like explaining that. And that's why for us, lived experience, everything we do has that at the heart of it, because to understand what other people have been through, to give you that language, you just, I guess, if you've been through something, you can have that knowledge. And it's not to say that you can't, if you don't have lived experience, you can't, whether as a carer or as a relative, whatever, or personal. But it's just that kind of the common understanding. And like what Ken was saying there, giving someone the language, the words to say, it's not going great. And I think, again, if someone is struggling, I think so often, especially with men, we will have people that we know are struggling. And so often it's so easy not to make the effort, right? It's so easy just to be like, well, they are maybe drinking a lot or doing something else. And it's so easy for that to go for so long. And I think it's just, there's so long a culture of it's not my job to ask, or someone else will pick up on that. And for me, for us, who's is it not all of our jobs to look out for that? And I think that's something which is really, yeah, like Ken was saying there, that just asking and sitting alongside someone, be on that bench with them, 2 meters apart from them right now. And I think the other thing would be about the reaching out for help. For me, I'm such a fan of role modeling behaviour, because then if you're going to ask someone else how they're doing, then you yourself can turn around and say, hey, I went through a time when I went and asked for help, or when I went and did that. And I'm not saying you have to struggle, but it gives you that empathy. And just like a practical tip there, you mentioned how would you, if someone was struggling today, use key messages as an in. Say, I was at an event about reaching out for help. I've noticed you're maybe a bit quieter than usual. Oh, have you seen that stuff about clear your head on? I might actually use that stuff myself. Is that something you've thought about using? Just to be practical tips there to make it more normalised and everyday.
Can I just come in there?
Absolutely. Come in, Lisa Jane.
Hi, everybody. Lisa Jane from Breathing Space here. Just picking up on Ken's point about, the 2 words that come into my mind, the patience and persistence that sometimes is around. Because obviously, if we are recognising that somebody close to us and somebody that we love and have a good relationship with is perhaps struggling, but they're not perhaps in a place to have the words or talk about it in any great detail. So I know myself on occasion when I've had concerns about individuals in my life, if I try and open up the conversation, I can be faced with words like, I'm fine, and having to recognise, well, actually what I'm seeing in you and what I'm hearing. And I've also got this gut feeling that something's not quite right. And for that reason, because I care about you, I want to open up the conversation and just check things out with you. But again, this kind of patience, persistence, compassion for the person, because I think very often we want to fix things. So I know for me, you very often want to get the person to help or provide solutions, but actually it's about keeping that person in front of you at the centre and really listening to what they have to say and being compassionate and supportive with what it is that they're telling you. And what Lynn was saying is recognising the opportunity that there's a whole host of campaigns, messages, resources, and also services that can be available. So for you, if you're in that position of providing support to an individual, then we have to look after our mental health and well-being, and very often we have to take our conversations or our concerns somewhere, and to recognise that if we're providing emotional support to others, then sometimes we need a bit of emotional support ourselves, just to kind of debrief and keep us in a place that we can still care and we can still be compassionate, rather than us starting to feel as if, oh, my mental health has been affected here because I'm giving so much and taking so much on board. So yeah, just wanted to share some of my thoughts there, Sophie.
Absolutely. I think that's such a valuable point, Lisa Jane, because I think a lot of us are in this position anyway, but I think more of us are in this position after 2020, in that we are trying to provide emotional support to the people around us who are experiencing illness or redundancy or just stress at the entire lockdown situation. And that doesn't mean just because we're busy supporting other people that we can't be affected and we don't need support. So I think that's such a valuable message. Thank you. And actually, I wanted to ask, actually, if you could tell us a bit more about Breathing Space, because we've talked a little bit about actually the various ways that people can reach out. You know, some people want to reach out to, you know, their spouse or their friends. And actually, for some people, a place like the Men's Shed is actually going to be perfect, you know, somewhere where actually they can just go talk to other guys. But actually, for some people, a helpline is a really useful option. So just tell us a bit about what is it? How does it work? What do you do?
Sure. Okay, so Breathing Space is Scotland's telephone-based helpline for people living in Scotland over the age of 16 who is perhaps worrying about things, feeling anxious, feeling overwhelmed, right through to people who might be harming themselves or who are experiencing thoughts of suicide, you know, suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. So this phone line service is there, and we provide support for a range of different reasons. And although we're there for people in crisis, what we're really encouraging people to do is to look at engaging and picking up the phone to our service as and when their mental health is starting to feel as if not in control, or that it's starting to have things are starting to have an impact on them, in the hope that they have the space to share whatever it is that's going on for them.
Just so when you say in crisis, you're talking about actually the point where people, they kind of reach the end of the tether and they just look, I can't deal with this anymore. It's the point where you suddenly, I don't know about you, I certainly had a point where I just kind of reached the end of my tether. I was like, I can't do this. I was just crying in a corner. And actually it was much harder to come back from that point. So what you're asking people to do is to kind of just check in earlier.
Of course, exactly. Now, that's not to say that you know, the service is not available for people who are in that corner, who are who are emotional, who just feel that, you know, life just is too difficult. You know, we are there to provide that support if and when a person feels like that. But that's not the only thing that we do. We don't want people waiting to that point. We want to be ensuring that people recognise that this is a free service that can be accessed as long as you're over the age of 16 by picking up the phone. And it's a safe space to dump your stuff, do you know? So perhaps it could be you're overwhelmed with the fact that you're having to homeschool, look after a toddler, work, you're maybe drinking too much, you're not sleeping enough, you know, and you're starting to recognise behaviours that you're participating in that you wouldn't ordinarily, but you're doing it because you're trying to cope and trying to manage all the overwhelming emotion that you're experiencing during the day. You know, perhaps in a situation like that, you would consider picking up the phone and just using it as a space to share your reality and what it's like living your life at this moment in time, for that person on the other end of the phone to give you that breathing space for you to share your story and see it, you know, differently, maybe clearer, for somebody to reflect back and offer other sources of strategies, support, perhaps other organisations that have resources that you might find helpful. So really trying to encourage people to consider it in a daily, you know, part of their daily life, rather than getting things to becoming a crisis.
And so if I were to ring Breathing Space, can you tell me a little bit about what what that journey would be like, because I think
Sure.
that can be a bit intimidating. I think if it just, making that first phone call is really hard. So tell us a bit about what it's like when you pick up the phone.
Sure. So the phone number for Breathing Space is 0800 83 85 87. So pick up the phone, dial the number, and the phone will ring. Now, when you're connected to the service, you will either be connected to a male or a female, because we have a range of, we have both male and female advisors on the line. And when you're connected to an advisor, the advisor will say something like, "Hello, you're through to Breathing Space. Tell me a wee bit about what's going on for you at the moment." Now, some people, you'll appreciate, will go quite quickly into telling us what's going on, because actually they've been waiting for, they've maybe been building up the confidence and courage to phone, so therefore they'll dump everything really quickly. But for others, it might be, it takes them some time. So at times we will be faced with silence, and that's okay. Our advisors would say something like, "You've done the hardest part, you've picked up the phone, you're now connected to a space that will allow you time to tell us a bit about your story. Perhaps you could, in the next couple of minutes, tell us a wee bit about what's going on." But really and what we find is that people do start telling us, maybe just in small details, and we've got to work harder to extract the information, but through giving them the time, the space, and that compassionate response, we can find that actually we can have a really meaningful conversation with people when they contact us.
Are there specific opening hours?
There is, Lynn. So we're open from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Monday to Thursday, and then 24 hours at the weekend.
Okay.
Breathing Space is part of NHS 24. So if you live in Scotland, you will know NHS 24 can be accessed through 111, dialing 111. We also have access to a mental health hub in Scotland, which can also provide emotional support in a moment of crisis. So you have got two options in that NHS 24 is provided 24/7. However, when you phone NHS 24, you have to give your name, your address, your postcode, your date of birth. When you phone Breathing Space, you're not expected to give any of that personal detail, because our calls aren't recorded and our conversations are confidential and can often, are anonymous, in that we don't necessarily expect a name, an address, a date of birth. Perhaps people want to share it, they want to say, "I'm Lisa Jane and I'm 36" within their story, which is fine, but that isn't recorded. And what we know is that providing personal detail can be a barrier for folk. So that's why it's important to have services that actually don't take all that personal data, because we've known in the past that can put people off accessing places.
That's a really good description, I think, of actually what it's actually like to use a helpline like Breathing Space. And I suppose one thing I would just add is obviously Breathing Space is running in Scotland, where myself and Lisa Jane are. I don't think there is an NHS helpline like this for the rest of the UK, but the one I would really recommend for the rest of the UK would be Samaritans. If you do know of any other helpline resources in the rest of the UK that you'd recommend, please do share them in the chat, because that's a really useful resource for other people on the call.
Just to come in there as well, Sophie, I would always be signposting to Samaritans, because Lynn had asked, when are we opened? And actually we are not open 24/7, so it's important for people to have choice. And the Samaritans is also a listening service who can provide emotional support at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whereas Breathing Space isn't opened at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. However, the mental health hub is, but it might be that you're wanting that, anonymous support. So it's just making sure people know they've got options. And I noticed that they put in the chat about Breathing Space web chat. So we've been piloting a web chat option for about 18 months now, and that can be accessed through our website. And what that does is allows people to connect with an advisor over your laptop or your mobile phone, which again, perhaps might be a first step for folk. You know, if people are not feeling able to pick up that phone, perhaps they can build a rapport and a relationship over the web chat, in the hope that perhaps through time their confidence is built and they can pick up the phone, or perhaps they get enough support over web chat. But again, it's about choice and options for people.
Absolutely. And again, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to invite Breathing Space and Mensheds to this call is to show that actually different things work for different folks, and everyone has different sources of support around them, and that, you know, there are all these different ways that you can reach out. So please never feel that there's nothing open to you, because there always absolutely will be someone, and there will be Lynn,
I
go on.
was going to mention, the other one which I've used myself is the Employee Assistance Programme number. That I don't know whether people do have that, whether they are employed, and if that might be a benefit, a employee benefit. But I definitely relate to what Lisa Jane was saying there about not letting it build up and get to crisis point. I know for me, I've been living alone during lockdown, and when you do work and you're living alone, it's been really isolating, and sometimes you just want to talk to someone. And that's where, like, I have phoned an employee assistance program just to be like, you don't have that natural interaction right now where you're like, like, this person's not replied, or I can't work out this, or oh my gosh, my washing machine's broken. There's just things that in your day-to-day interaction, which I realized I was really missing from one-off conversations to, my niece being born, how I ended up going to Sainsbury's just to tell someone because I wanted to share that with someone, because that was the only thing I was allowed to do. Just actually having a human to talk to, and it's that non-judgmental space. And I get that for me, helplines have that space where I am fortunate. I do have people. I have support networks, well mapped out support networks who are there for me. Sometimes I don't want to talk to them. I want to talk to them for conversation, for socializing. I kind of want to dump my stuff on someone I don't know sometimes. And that's where, when you reach out to someone, that you can pick up the phone and say, I'm just having a bad day, would you mind listening? And that's what they're there for. And for me, that's been a really useful thing as a lone person, when it can feel like solitary confinement after 9 months.
Yeah, that's so true, Lynn. Absolutely so true. I think so many of us are struggling with loneliness, and I think there's still stigma around loneliness. I think we're becoming more aware of it as we, start to realize that some people are living in lockdown. I say this with the privilege of, as you can tell, of someone who lives with a husband and a cat. Sometimes the cat feels like a privilege and other times not. But we're starting to become more aware of that. But we're not actually, I think, as good as recognizing that also you can be lonely even when you're surrounded by people. You can be in a flat share, you can be living at home and still feel lonely or isolated, and that can be a real challenge too. Just a reminder that we have a little bit of time for questions now. I've had a question come in from Lowry, which I'm going to field to the panel, but if you have any more questions, please do send them either in the chat or directly to Lowry. Either way is fine, and we'll go through those, and then we've got a little bit of time for a couple of extra questions I want to ask you guys, because you're just fountains of knowledge. So we have a question from Andy. Andy's working with someone who has impaired hearing, and technology basically is not great for them. Do our panelists know basically of any potential kind of sources of support that exist for people like her? Not in Scotland, unfortunately. So we would be looking for UK-wide sources of support.
I don't, Sophie. I know on the Breathing Space website, we have a page that is around accessibility that looks at Contact Scotland and another app that can be used for people with who are BSL. BSL is their first language or have difficulty, but in the UK, I'm not entirely sure, so I'm unable to answer that, I'm afraid.
I was just going to say that we have the signposting like link which we have on our website, which is basically a page of different things, which might, in amongst them, I understand it involves a lot of research and support, and we have a partnership with Deaf Scotland around that. We're getting some of our resources translated as well, but this is something my background is in inclusion and diversity, and it is a really welcome raising that point, that whether it's translation into English as a second language, or whether it's which I find being neurodiverse, having back-to-back meetings on screen that I find really hard. And for us, there is this we forget that if it's out of, we can remote working and remote access to services, there's loads of daily issues that come into that. But do you remember there are face-to-face services when they can't be offered online or remotely that are still being offered? So if there is that, then I would just highlight if there is a medical problem as well, you can go down as well, highlight that you do actually need, but there hopefully would be support and understanding provided.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn. That's really helpful. We have a question from Sarah in Dunfermline, who wants to know, and I suspect this might be something either Lisa or Lynn can help with, about whether there are specific support networks for teenagers and young people.
In terms of our service, Sarah, we have noticed with web chat that those aged between 16 and 25 are accessing web chat more than any other age group. The reason we know that is because when you click on the web chat button, you're asked what health board area do you come from and what age group are you in, and we suspected that the data that we're getting is what we suspected, and that young people find it easier to chat via web chat than what they do picking up the phone. In terms of those younger than 16, I would always be signposting to Childline, which is a helpline number, but also has a whole host of other resources and materials and support mechanisms. You know, they've got forums, they've got, you can book a session with a telephone-based counsellor as long as they're 18, I think it is, right enough. They've got storyboards, they've got so much that they can tap into. Lynn, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Sorry, I was just popping in the chat. Yeah, I was just looking at our national signposting directory. So yeah, for that age group, education young people, for us, they're a programme. It's, again, we're not a service that provides that. It's young people who care about challenging stigma and doing community-based projects around that. For specific age-related things, I imagine you'll know that there are a lot of support places out there, but it is whether you want to go through something, say you do experience bipolar or you experience depression, you might want to go through something where people are like-minded experiences. So it just depends. Support groups is a really wide term. There's lots of other things which are run in the community, like peer cafes or recovery cafes. So I guess I don't really, there's loads of stuff out there. I guess it's about finding the one that suits and resonates with you. I don't know if anyone uses Alice. I'm regretting these wireless headphones now, they just keep falling out. Yeah, Alice, if you used that before, it's a signposting website about what local resources are on offer, and I can put a link to that if that's useful as well. But just definitely, I think if people, if you find something that doesn't work, trying another outlet as well. I think that's the reason people we understand. People face stigma and discrimination when they go for help. The amount of people that I've encouraged to go and get help, and then they say, I've not had enough time, or to talk about my problem with the GP, or you've tried to reach out to your friend and they've just said, oh, they've just dismissed it. And I would say just keep asking, and ask once, but then for other people say asking again how people are. And if you've asked someone for help and been really disappointed, I'm so sorry that was your experience. It might happen, it will happen. Not everyone is totally trained and open to this. There will be someone that will listen. That's
so well put. Thank you, Lynn. And we actually just had someone asking about that in the chat in a very similar way, which was about what happens when we ask for advice and for whatever reason the person that we reach out to isn't available, isn't able to help us. Because I think it's one thing, you know, it's different situations, both very difficult to deal with. One is if you reach out for help from, say, a GP and you don't get a satisfying response, and also if you reach out to someone, in your family or your friends, and for whatever reason they're not able to help you. Maybe they're dealing with something, maybe they have something else that stops them from supporting you. So the question was basically, how do we do with that if we reach out and actually we're not supported in the way that we want? And obviously I would love to hear from the rest of the panel on this as well. So Ken and Lisa Jane, do come in on this if you would like.
Actually, I'll just taking a quick answer to Sarah there, who was asking. There was a younger, lower age limit for men's sheds. Each men's shed in the country is an individual organisation, and they set their own membership criteria. And generally speaking, they're looking at 55 and up. However, there are a number of men's sheds who have basically an 18-year-old and up. That's largely to do with the fact that we've got some machinery in there that you don't want anyone under the age of 18 being even close to. So it's worth reaching out to your local men's shed, and you'll find them through either the UK Men's Shed Association website or the Scottish Men's Shed Association website, who both have really good sort of find your local shed type pages.
Bro, thanks. I think we're still getting questions coming through, but I think what I'm going to do now is start to bring the session to a close. So if you have any pressing questions, please do pop them in the chat and we'll try and get to them. But we are going to start wrapping up the session. So final questions for all of our panelists. Just wondering if you have any closing tips that you've not mentioned, perhaps a kind of a favored way that you have either of reaching out for yourself or for someone else. I've noticed that when I'm reaching out to someone and wanting to kind of check in on how they are, I've started using the phrase, "How are you managing?" Which I think, because as someone else has mentioned, if you say, I was like, "Oh, how are you?" and we all go, "Oh, I'm fine." As no, we're not fine. No one's fine. We're all finding different ways of trying to manage the situation. And so I think acknowledging that, we're sort of going, how are you managing this awful time in history is my way currently of opening up a conversation. So just wondering if you had any other ways that you would like to share.
Definitely for me, really trying to find other ways to open up emails rather than hope you're well. I just I say I hope you're managing as well as possible during this difficult time, or I hope things are as well as could be expected. As I think without a context disclaimer and saying, hey, yeah, or I wonder if you're feeling as messy as I am right now. So anything which just kind of sets the tone, that I don't mind if you share that. To come back to the one, what do you do if you don't have the answers for people, or people don't meet your needs? Nobody expects you to be a professional when you open up conversations, and that's something which we stress at CME. We do have Time to Talk Day as a practical kind of action and plug for after the session if people are really keen and want to keep conversations going. Across the UK, we have a day called Time to Talk Day, where it's encouraging talking about mental health. This year's theme is something small making a difference. So if that small thing is you having one conversation, I think resources we will share after today's session. So I just really encourage you then after today is we have loads of packs, resources, things you can download to start those conversations as well.
And Lynn, that was really helpful, because I'm aware that my emails often start that I hope you are well, and it's just habit. So I've took a note of that. So I'm definitely.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I wasn't meaning to have a go at you. If someone comes back to you, I just feel like being like, well, like, oh, I hope you had a good weekend. No, I didn't. It was rubbish. Like, so right. I couldn't do anything.
You're so right. And language is so important as well. And you know, in the hope that people feel that they can come to you. So I've learned a good few things this afternoon as well, and take away bits. So just for the likes of myself, you know, life for some people it can be quite busy and can be quite overwhelming, and just the idea of trying to take time out for yourself, but also, you know, today I've been thinking about, you know, the wider team and actually very often we get so consumed with what's going on for us, because, you know, things are just so different and we're trying to manage. But, you know, just organising that, picking up on the phone and contacting my pal that I've not spoke to for a couple of weeks because we've not been able to go for coffee, or the idea of organising a kind of catch up over lunch on Teams with some of my colleagues that I would ordinarily go and boil the kettle with, and just this kind of idea of what stuff can I do between the email, you know, right away learning something, and at different parts of my day that will also make me feel a wee bit better as well as others. So I suppose in that note, there's simple things that we can all be doing that might help our mental health and well-being, as well as recognising that there's simple ways that we can be changing what we project and how we ask questions that can help others as well. So yeah, there's been a few light bulb moments for me this afternoon, and hopefully you guys are the same.
Absolutely. One thing that's away back in March when we went into lockdown at the beginning, and we all went, it'll just be for a couple of weeks, it'll be fine. It was difficult for us to shut the sheds, but we thought we'll be back in a couple of weeks. And when that went on to being a month or so, I think a number of people who do sheds felt that everything has suddenly come crashing down around them. These systems that we had for our own organisation and our own good mental health had suddenly disappeared. That social contact had disappeared. And what it reminded me is one of the things that we'd find, or what other bodies that have done research in it have found, one of the major triggers for mental health and physical health problems is when you have a big life-changing event, such as retirement or bereavement or the loss of jobs, and you suddenly find the day-to-day has stopped. The normal getting up, getting washed, getting dressed, going out, going to work isn't there. There's no need for it anymore for some reason. And a lot of people fall into poor mental health, poor physical health as a consequence of that. And we were concerned, of course, this is what's going to happen across all our shed chaps. They were going to lapse back into that sort of behaviour. So we have opened up Zoom meetings. We try to reach out by phone as much as we can. If we see somebody in the street, and occasionally we do, we always make a point of talking to them and try to keep that going, but we're also trying to establish regular activities. So Wednesdays and Fridays we have a Zoom meeting. We get our placeholders in the week again, and that matters a lot for just keeping you focused, keeping you roughly an idea of what day of the week it is, because that comes. And if you find you've got maybe a father, a friend, a brother, a neighbour, or somebody who's having problems, point them to, to the Sheds associations. Find one that's having online meetings. They'll be more than welcome. Just pop in, send us a message. We'll send you a link, and you can join one of our online sessions just for a chat and a cup of coffee. Doesn't have to be anything other than that. But it gives you somebody to talk to instead of sitting staring at the walls or shouting at the telly.
That's very well put. I've definitely started shouting at the telly more. So thank you for that, Ken. And I think that's just a really good reminder to please do reach out to the Men's Sheds if you think that they will, if that's something that will be helpful for you, or if there's a man in your life who you think actually might benefit, please do put them in touch with the Men's Sheds and encourage them to give them a call. Remember that Breathing Space are always here, and particularly if there's anything that's come up for you today during the session and you'd like to kind of go over that, or you'd like to just speak to someone, Breathing Space will be there. Or out of hours, again, you can contact Samaritans, and the details are in the chat as well. And on that, I'm just going to briefly bring the session to a close. There are just a couple of other things I want to mention. And the first is thank you all again for coming. It's been amazing to see people connecting in the chat. There's been a lot of actually people kind of touching in with each other, some support going on, a lot of sharing of advice and resources and signposting, which is really, really valuable. So thank you all for contributing. That's absolutely fantastic to see. hope that these sessions provide an opportunity for people to connect, because we do know that that's missing from so much of our lives at the moment, and we run them weekly. If you'd like to come along to future sessions, obviously we're looking at mental health at the moment, but we run them on a variety of topics, usually related to community connection in some shape or form. And if you follow the Eden Project Community's Facebook page, or if you sign up to our newsletter, we will keep you up to date with all of the latest events and opportunities to engage and talk to other people. And we would love to see you there. My colleague Laurie has just shared an evaluation link. We've had loads of people in the chat telling us that they really appreciated the session, which is really great for us to hear. Thank you so much for that feedback. If you do have time to fill in the evaluation form so that we can collect some of that information, that we would be hugely grateful for that as well. And I think those are the last things I had to add. So again, it's just a huge thank you from me. Thank you to all of you for coming. A huge thank you to our panelists for giving up your time and sharing your insight and your experiences as well. It's been hugely valuable for me. I think we've all learned something, and I think we've all felt a bit more supported as well. So thank you for coming along. And I will just wish the rest of you well for the rest of the day. I hope it is calming and relaxing as much as it can be in this hectic world. So as much as is possible for you in your context, I hope the rest of your day goes really, really well. And thank you again for coming.